Okay, I'm going to start today by picking up where we left off on Monday. So on Monday we were working on a version of our course website, and I'm just going to pull that up real quick. This is the version of the course website we were working on, and we got to the point where we had these elements here. These lists of things are floated, and they now appear next to each other, and that's the way that we did this as well. We have this image floated to the left, and we have this stuff not floated. And what happens with floated elements is that they appear to the left or the right of everything else, and all the rest of the text content flows around it, sort of moves up to take its place next to it. These floated elements, though, these are causing a bit of a problem because we have this really large description here next to the textbook. So that's making the width of this really wide. And the widths of these are a lot narrower, and we want to get to the point where we've got them all next to each other, like on the course website. Just pull that up real quick. Okay, so we want these just basically side by side. So let's go back and take a look at our code again. Whoa, I did hit play. Huh. Okay. Oops. Okay, so we've got these lists over here, and each of these is, I've wrapped these in a class called column, and we've floated everything that has a class of column to the left. So that's how we've accomplished these being side by side next to each other. But what I want to do is I want to restrict the width of these things so that they will have a certain maximum. In fact, I can actually, if I take a look at this, it looks like the widths of these is pretty uniform. The width is not just sort of growing and shrinking based on the width of the content. So I'm just going to guess at the width of these, and I'm going to say that they're probably about 10 ems. Give that a shot. Yeah, that's a little bit narrow. Let's try 15 ems. Too big? 12. Just right. Okay, excellent. It looks like we got a funky header down there. The other header is getting in the way of stuff. Oh, that's supposed to be an H3, not an H2. I noticed on Tuesday that the other section was missing, so I added it in there. Okay, so now we have, maybe we can do a couple more things here. So these headers here are a lot tighter to the lists. So how are we gonna make them make these headers be closer to these lists? These headers have a bunch of space between the bottom of this and the top of this, right? How do we get rid of that? Well, why don't we go ahead and inspect this element just to see what might be causing that. So if I hover my mouse over this, we can see that Firebug highlights certain areas of this element with different colors. The cyan is the actual text content of the color, the actual width and height of the element. And then yellow is always margin. If there's padding, then the padding will be purple. Why don't we hover over this UL here, and we can see the UL also has some default top and bottom margin and some default left padding. Okay, so we can get rid of these margins and padding if we want to make this a little bit tighter. So let's say that if an H3 is inside of a column, we want to get rid of its margins and padding. We just want to say margin 0. Actually, it didn't have any padding, so we don't need to do anything about that. And then if we say dot column UL, we'll get rid of the margins and padding on the UL inside of a column. So we'll say margin 0, padding 0. Okay, that's pretty close. Still got some things to work on, but that's looking pretty good. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get rid of those bullets? Those bullets don't need to be there. How do we get rid of those? Remember, anyone? List style type. So column UL, we'll do that on the UL, list style type. We set it to none to remove the bullets. Excellent. Okay. The last thing that we're running into, the next major thing that we're running into is we've got this bar up here and we've got all this other stuff down here that's moving up next to the floated stuff, which is what happens when you float stuff. These floats only occupy over until here on the page, and there's still room for text content to go next to it. So that's what happens naturally when you float something. What we want to do is we want to make it so this stuff moves down beneath all the floated stuff. And that brings us to the next slide that we didn't get to yet on Monday. So we went through borders, margins, and we went through floats. The next property we want to go over is the clear property. The clear property is what allows you to control the behavior of things around floats. So if you don't want things to move up next to floats, if you want them to go beneath floats, you can use the clear property. Clear is sort of an ambiguous word. Like a lot of people think clear as being like delete or like erase or something. That's not the sense of clear that this is. This is clear like, think if you're going into an underground parking garage and there's a bar at the top and it says clearance, right? 6'4" or something. So you have to be beneath 6'4" in order to go there. So what you want to do is you want to clear that bar. When you set the clear property, you're clearing something that will go above you. So if I want to have something after something floated, so this image of Homestar here is floated to the right, and this text content here is wrapping around it. If I want this thing to go beneath it, I say clear right to indicate that I want to clear anything that's floated to the right. So we can do that on some of our things on the course website. So a lot of our stuff here, so this second gray bar here, I put on, what did I put that on? Let's see, I put it on the bottom of the header. Maybe I'll put it on something else. Maybe I'll put it on ID equals, no, I make this a separate section of the page. This will be the main section of the page. ID equals main, and this has got all the main content of the page. Okay, I'm going to move all of that into main. Okay, and then we might as well go ahead and add a footer here. All of this stuff here is kind of footer material, so we'll just say footer. Okay, so we now have a main section of our page and a footer, and I'm going to switch. So I put a bottom margin, bottom border on the header. I'm going to switch that to a main. I'm going to switch that to a top border on main. So main comes right after header. So I'm basically switching it from one to the other. I refresh the page and it looks exactly the same. So how do I make all of this content, this main content of the page, shift down? Well, we can just use the clear property for that. So I can also set on main, I can say clear anything floated to the left. And it'll move everything down beneath that. We can adjust margins and padding if we want to. This stuff up here, like if we really wanted to make it look right, we'd have to add some extra space here and some extra space to the left. I'm not going to worry about that for now. The major thing is we've moved all this stuff down. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe we'll just real quickly, we'll, no, we won't do that. Okay, that's looking pretty good. The next thing I want to look at is something called, so this is a diagram illustrating clear. We have this sidebar that's floated to the right, and then this paragraph here, we've set clear right, so it goes beneath anything floated to the right. Common error, container too short. So this is something that you're going to run into a lot when you float stuff. The thing about floats is that they sort of naturally extend beyond the boundaries of whatever they're contained inside of. So if I have this image inside of this paragraph, as I do here, so this is inside of the paragraph that comes before the text, this image will extend down beneath the bottom edge of this paragraph. The paragraph, its height only extends to that, whatever height is necessary to contain the text, not to contain the floated material. So we want this to extend all the way down to the bottom, and so we need to figure out some way of doing that. Well, there's a property that sort of allows us to do that. It wasn't intended to allow this, and it's sort of counterintuitive, but this is what people just sort of use to make this happen. It's called the overflow property. If you set overflow to be hidden, what happens is the browser sort of expands the height of this to encompass this stuff that was previously spilling out. The idea of overflow is you want to control what content, if you have content that's spilling over the boundaries of this box, you can control whether it's seen or hidden or whether it causes scroll bars. You can switch this to, so let's modify this with Firebug. Overflow scroll will cause scroll bars to appear. Oops. Forget that these slides move if you scroll. Thing is, so the way that the browser sort of interprets this is as soon as you set overflow to hidden, it's like, well, I don't want to hide anything by default. I want to show everything by default. So I'm just going to expand so that nothing has to be hidden. But what you can do is you can actually force it to hide stuff if you restrict the width and the height. So in this case, I'm going to want to restrict the height. I'm going to say height is, 2 ems. Okay, so that'll restrict the height of this, and it causes scrolling to occur in this element. Of course, the slides also scroll when you scroll, so that's a little bit tough to illustrate. Where'd it go? Here we go. Or I can just say hidden, which just hides the stuff. If I switch it back to visible, which is the default, then you can see it spill out. But we've also restricted the height, so the height remains where we put it. Okay, so that's the overflow property. It's a little bit awkward, a little bit weird, and counterintuitive that you want to say overflow hidden to expand the thing so it's not hidden, but that's the way it works. Okay, so let's do a couple more things with our course website, and then we can move on. I want to let's see. I want to make this textbook, I want to make this floated so that the content flows around it. And to do that, I want to sort of move it up. I want to kind of move it up. Let's see. I'm going to move it up here. I'm going to say, here's our book. It's really cool. Go buy 100,000 copies today. Move it up to the top of the page. But that's really awkward, so I want all the text to flow around it. So I'm going to make this thing be floated to the right. I'm going to make the image. I'll give it an ID. ID equals textbook. And I'll make it floated to the right. Textbook, float right. Okay, That's excellent. Actually, you know, what would be even better is if I included the paragraph in the textbook. Here, let's do this. PID equals textbook, and then this will be a caption beneath it. PR. There we go. Okay, that's much better. Let's make it so that this stuff appears beneath this textbook stuff. So we want this to go all the way to the bottom of the page. We want this to appear after the textbook stuff. So what we can do is we can say that we want the footer, we want this to move down beyond the floated stuff. The way that we do that is with clear. So we can say footer, clear right. That will clear any content that was floated to the right. Down beneath it. Let's say we also want to assign a background color to this content area. So we'll look at the main section here and say we want a background color. It's my favorite, light gray. Okay, so we've got a background color now for this main section of the page. But this is also in the main section of the page. So we want this background color to extend down beneath this, to the bottom of this. So what we would do is we would set on the textbook thing, we would say, or actually, sorry, not on the textbook. The textbook is the thing that's extending beyond the boundaries of the content area. We want this content area to expand down beneath it. So we're going to say on this content area, we want anything that overflows it to be hidden. Content area main, overflow hidden. And the browser says, well, I don't want to hide anything by default. So unless you actually physically, explicitly restrict the height of this, I'm just going to expand the height automatically to encompass everything. Okay. That looks lovely. I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. And we're going to move on to today's material. And we'll come back to that as we make a few more changes with today's lecture material. Okay, the last couple of things we need to talk about with CSS. We'll talk about a smattering of a few more things throughout the rest of the quarter related to CSS, but we're going to move on to our third programming language on Friday. So we're going to finish up with the bulk of CSS today. The last thing is, so we've learned two major things so far that have to do with positioning and layout. We've learned floating, and we've learned the box model property. The box model property allows you to add spacing between elements. The floating allows you to have elements appear side by side and have text content flow around them. The position property is a third thing, the third major key component of moving things around on the page. It's one that a lot of people tend to gravitate toward when they're new, but it's actually one of the least useful. This one is one that you want to, it has its specific uses, and it's very good for its specific uses, but it's not as useful as you might think. So the position property allows you to change the behavior of an element with respect to other elements on the page. Absolute positioning, position absolute, removes the element from the document flow. So by default, if I hadn't absolutely positioned this menu bar thing here, it would be somewhere in this stack of elements. So I've absolutely positioned this element. It removes it from the normal document flow. Everything else just sort of goes to take its place. And then I can, if I position this thing using these two other properties, left and top, I can move it anywhere on the screen that I like, at any arbitrary coordinates, any arbitrary location. Which sounds cool and sounds powerful, but it's actually not all that, not super useful. So the actual position is determined by these four properties here. Once you set position absolute, then you want to also set one of these four things. those determine its location on screen. You should also often specify a width and sometimes a height as well. If you specify a width, then the text inside of it will automatically flow and the height will automatically be adjusted. Relative positioning is actually, it's most useful as a container for something that's absolutely positioned. So if you want to position something absolutely with respect to a containing bounding box, you can set its container to be at position relative and the child that you want to position somewhere in that to be absolutely positioned. As an example of that, let's go back to our course website here, and I'm going to, let's do this. Let's make, so I have these dates here. I want to move these dates, and I want them to be like at the very end of the line. So each of these things is a list item. I'm going to take those things out of those list items and move them all the way to the right side of the page. Maybe I'll set a margin on the right side of the page so that, this is going to look weird with this textbook over here, but oftentimes I like to put things in the margins that are sort of visual cues of this is what's here. So maybe I'll add a right margin to the body, margin right 10 ems. That'll move everything in from the right side of the page a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so I've got these spans already wrapped around these dates. I should probably add a class to these to indicate that they are dates. Date. 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 And then in my CSS I can say date, position, absolute, right 0 pixels. This will put it all the way to the right side of its containing element. Okay, so that put it all the way over here. What if I want it to be all the way to the right side of this thing and not to the right side of the entire page? Let's put a background color on these LIs. ID equals announcements. So the announcements LI, I'll say background color orange. Okay, so these things only extend to the right of this containing element, but I've absolutely positioned these to be the right side of the page. How do I make it so that these things appear to the right side of this instead of the right side of the page? Well, what I want to do is I want to make this thing be the new containing element for this absolutely positioned element inside of it. And the way that I do that is I just make the LI be position relative. As soon as I do that, these things move to the right side of that instead. So it becomes the new container when you use right, left, top, and bottom. They're with respect to this element instead of with respect to the entire page. By default, the containing element is the entire page. So this is what I use absolute and relative positioning for most of the time. I just use it to position things within something else. Actually, I think what I'll do is I'll just make a couple of tweaks to that. I'll say text align left, background color, just so I can see it. Text align left. Okay. Right now, actually. Trying to think of a clever way to make this left aligned to the edge of this. I'll have to think on that. Okay. I'll leave the fuchsia there though. Okay. The next thing, the next type of positioning, and one of the more useful ones actually. Yeah. Go ahead. That's a good question. Why does the orange background occlude the images? Good word, occlude. So what we can do is we can actually make, so if we turn the background color off, it wouldn't appear there. It would be translucent, but it would still actually be on top of that. What we can do is we can, there's another property that we can set. Let's see, is it on the slides here? It's not on the slides, it should be. No, it's not. There's another property that we can set. It's called z-index. If something is absolutely, relatively, or what we'll see in a second is fixed positioned, if it's any of those types of positioning, we can actually, the fact that we can put them in any arbitrary location on screen means that sometimes they might overlap each other. And in order to determine which ones occlude, or which ones are closer than others, which ones overlap other ones, we can use a property called z-index. So the fact that I have relatively positioned these means I can say z-index. I'm gonna make it -1 so that it just moves all the way to the back. And I think that should fix that. Oh, I think it put it behind this whole thing. I'll make this z-index 0, and I'll make the textbook image z-index 1. How about that? There we go. In order for z-index to work, I have to assign some sort of position property on it. And actually, so position relative, if you just set position relative, but you don't use top, bottom, right, or left, it just doesn't do anything. It stays where it is, it doesn't move anywhere. It just becomes a containing element. And you can also set z-index on it. Yeah?
So that's going to be one way to design layers into your website?
Exactly. That's one way to design layers. You might think that layers, layers are important in things like Photoshop or like Illustrator. It turns out that on the web that they're less important. That sort of gets into why to use CSS and floats and things like that as opposed to tables. It's similar to the argument of why to use floats and things as opposed to absolute positioning. As an illustration of that, I'm going to wait to illustrate that until Friday. We're going to have an extra session on Friday. And one of the things we're going to talk about on Friday is something called, I always get this wrong, responsive CSS design, responsive web design. And I'll give you an example of that on Friday before the extra session. I'll show you an example of what that is. And that's a perfect illustration of why we want to use floats and just sort of the normal document flow as opposed to tables and absolute positioning. So I'll take a look at that on Friday. Okay, the last type of positioning is fixed positioning. It's similar to absolute positioning, but what it does is it allows you to keep that element in the same place on screen regardless of whether you scroll. So you've seen this oftentimes, like it's a common thing now, if you scroll down the screen, something might scroll up to the top, but then it sort of stays there as you scroll. What they're doing is with JavaScript, what they're doing is when you scroll to a certain point, it sets that to be fixed positioned, so that when you scroll the page, it stays in the same place. So what we can do is maybe one of these announcements is really important. So maybe I'll say that this one is a really important announcement. Class equals important. And I'm going to make that one appear always on screen at the top right of the screen or something, and make it really call it out all the time. So I'll say li.important announcements. Yeah, let's do that. So that we're selecting an announcement that is important. We can say position fixed, and then the way that we specify its location is using top, right, bottom, left. So I'm going to put it in the top right. I'm going to say top 0, right 0. And what that'll do is that will pull it out of the normal document flow. This will disappear from here, and these two things will move up to take its place. And it'll appear up here, regardless of whether I scroll, it'll still be on screen. So we've made that stay on screen in that particular location. I'm going to make it look a little bit nicer. Maybe I'll say width 15 ems. That'll make it list style type none. Background color pink. Border dashed 3 pixels red. So it's more like an important thing. Okay. All right. Of course, so I've put this in the top right. I can specify locations and dimensions in any of the standard dimensions. I can use pixels. I can use percentages. I can use ems, x's, points, things like that. I can use any of that. So maybe I'll just maybe the top right is not quite what I want. I'll just make it 1em from the top right. There we go. Excellent. Yeah.
So it seemed like when you scrolled it down, it actually was hidden by the image. Is that
Hidden by the image. Oh yeah, okay, that's because I set z-index on the other things. So if I want this to appear above everything else, by default, if I haven't set z-index on anything else, then this will usually, well actually, so these two things here will sort of collide. They'll sort of, it sort of depends on which thing comes later in the document, I think, which will override, will cover up anything previous. But because I have set z-index on the other ones, I'm going to go ahead and say z-index 2. So I have 0, 1, and 2. So this will make this appear on layer 2. You can think about it that way. Excellent. Okay, so that's fixed positioning. So we have these four major components. We have text align. Text align allows us to move text content left, right, center, justified. We also have floating. Floating allows us to move things to the left, to the right. We also have so floating applies to a block level element. Okay, so floating applies to a block level element, and the inline content flows up around it. So if we want to move something to the left or to the right and it's text, we would use text align. If we want to move something to the left or the right and it's a block, we would use float. How would we center a block? We looked at this also on Monday. I just want to make sure you guys remember how to do that. So we can center text using text align center within its container. But how do we center the container itself? Yeah. Yes, so we want to restrict the width of it to something narrower than what it would normally occupy, which would be 100% width. If we restrict the width and then we set left and right margins to auto, that means it'll automatically add an equal amount to either side, which will have the effect of centering that element. So the first thing that we should do is try to see if horizontal alignment using text align will work if we need to lay something out. If that doesn't work, try floating the element, or so if it's text and we want to align it, then we can use text align. But if it's not text, if it's a block element, then we're going to have to float it. If that doesn't work, we can try positioning the element. Absolute and fixed positioning should be a last resort. They should not be overused. So this is sort of the procedure you should go through if you're trying to lay something out. Try this first, and if that doesn't work, try that. Vertical align property. The vertical align property is a little bit funky, and yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can have floats inside of other floats, sure. Actually, that's a common thing to do. It's a common thing to use floats to lay out the entire stuff on your page. If you have a sidebar, you want to float that sidebar, and then if you have a main content area, you can either put a left margin on that to leave space for the floated sidebar, or you can float it also. So you have these two major things that are floated next to each other. They occupy 100% width of the page, and then everything else just goes beneath them. So that's a common way of doing a multi-column layout. And then inside of each thing, if you have something in the main area of your website, the main content area of your website, and you have something floated inside of that, it'll be to the left or the right of that container. So the vertical align property is something that students often mistake as being more useful than it is. It's useful, but in a very, very specific circumstance. Actually, this isn't the example that I wanted. I thought I uploaded. I'm going to go to mine. Course lectures. My local copy. It looks like I forgot to upload. I changed the example for that. Okay, so the vertical align property, what it does is it allows you to modify the position of an image with respect to the line of text. So here we have a line of text. This sphinx here has a descender and it has several ascenders. A descender is this little thing that on the P that hangs below the baseline. The baseline is the bottom of the regular letters. And then ascenders are the things that go above what's called the X height. The X height is from the top of the X to the top of the characters. So caps usually extend from the baseline to the very top. And then this thing the H has, this portion is at the X height and this portion is the cap height. Anyhow, so we've got this descender here. We've also got a character over here. This is in a span, and this is a character that has an ascender and a descender. And we have an image that's online with these pieces of text. This image, by default, an image will be vertical align baseline, which means that the bottom of the image will align with the baseline of text. We can modify that. We can say vertical align top, vertical align bottom, text top, text bottom, middle, sort of tries to put the image in the very middle of the middle of the image in the middle of the line of text. Super is for superscripts, and this varies by browser, but it looks like this is putting the bottom of the image at the top of the X height. And sub is putting, like, I don't know, maybe the middle of the image at the baseline or something. Anyhow, some of these I'm not really sure what the difference is, like top versus text top. I don't really know the difference between those. They're not really used very much. The purpose of this slide is partly to illustrate that the vertical align is not quite as useful as you might expect it to be. The one major use of it is in eliminating a common bug, actually. So we have this image here, and it's inside a paragraph, and this paragraph is styled with a background color of red and 0 margins and padding. 0 margins and padding. And yet, at the bottom of this image, we have a little gap. There's a little space down there. And we want to get rid of that. And we've already set 0 margins and padding. What is there left to do? Well, if I click this button here, it'll add some text that has descenders. And that illustrates that the image, by default, lives on the baseline. The bottom of the image is on the baseline of line of text. Descenders extend beneath that. So there's space left beneath this image for descenders, even though there aren't any. The way that we can fix this is to set vertical align, add element style, vertical align bottom. If we add the descenders back there, you can see that the bottom of the image is now aligned with the bottom of the line of text. So that's the way that you get rid of the space under the image. This will come back. That will come back again and again. Believe me. Okay, inline boxes. Okay, so the box model for inline elements is slightly different than for block level elements. So the block level element box model, let's go back and take a look at the box model from, oops, I think I closed the other slides there, so let's take a look. So this is the box model. An element has width and height. It also has padding, borders, and margins. So that's from the inside to the outside. By the way, the width and the height of the content, if you use CSS to specify width of 5 ems, for example, and then you also specify padding of 2 ems, what is the overall width of, so and maybe you have a background color set on it, what is the overall width of the background color space? So we set width 5 ems, padding 2 ems. Right, so it's 9 ems, it's not 5 ems. So when we say width, that's the width of the actual text area, and then padding is in addition to that. So is border. Border is in addition to that too. So if you want to calculate the overall width of an element, you have to add width plus left and right padding plus left and right borders, and possibly plus left and right margins. Left and right margins might space it, space it some distance from something else. So you have to consider all of those properties when you are considering the entire width of the element. The box model properties for inline elements are slightly different. They ignore size properties. So width, height, min height, max height, things like that, they completely ignore. So you can't specify the height or width of an inline element. So like an M or a strong or an A tag, a link, you can't specify width or height for those. Margin top and margin bottom are ignored, but left and right you can specify. So you can't specify top and bottom margin of something that lives on a line of text, but you can specify left and right margins to specify, like, space them apart from the words before them and after them. The containing blocks text align property controls horizontal position of inline boxes within it. Text align does not align block boxes within the page. So I can't specify text align right on an inline element. I have to specify text align right on its container. So if I have a paragraph and it's got a bunch of text and there's a link inside of it, I can't make that link be text align right. I have to make the entire paragraph be text align right. So each inline box's vertical align property aligns it vertically within its block box. So this is an example of that. This is a span that I've colored cyan. This is an example. This letter is an example of an inline element being vertically aligned within its container. So this is a containing element, and then this is a span. A span is an inline element. It's vertically aligned. So we can change the vertical line of this. By default, it's baseline. So this piece of text is aligned with the baseline. I can say bottom, and that doesn't look any different. Middle doesn't really look much different. Super, again, the baseline of this is aligned with the x height and so on. So this span here is being vertical aligned with respect to the line of text that it's on. Okay. The display property. Okay, so this is kind of the fourth thing that we use in layout. The display property, we've talked about block level elements, we talked about inline elements. We can actually modify elements to be something that they aren't by default. So the type of an element is determined by the browser's default and by the rules of HTML. But we can morph an element. I like to call this morphing elements. We can change it from a block level element to an inline element or vice versa. And in order to do that, we just say display inline or display block, display, there's also inline block. That's one that I really like to use a lot, actually. These other ones, run in and compact, actually run in, I think, was eliminated in CSS 2.1. Compact nobody uses. I really wish that I could use these actually, but I think nobody implemented them in browsers, so you can't use them anymore. So these are very useful sometimes, but they should also actually sort of be a last resort. They're good, but don't use them too often. So this is an example of displaying block elements as inline. This is a very common example. This is a very common example, for example, like to have like a navigation list across the top of your page, a list of navigation links. Oftentimes that'll be a UL with LIs. You can specify that each LI inside of that should just be display inline, and then should have a right margin of 1 ems. That'll space them apart. So they'll all appear in a line next to each other. So I've morphed these elements from block level elements to inline elements. So they now flow on the line of text inside of their containing element. The UL is still a block level element. So the UL now is their container, and they'll flow just like their EMs or strongs or A tags or whatever. I've transformed them into plain text. So if I resize this page and maybe I have a lot of these, then they'll scroll, they'll wrap to the next line. The visibility property. Visibility property allows you to make something invisible if you want to. You say visibility hidden. The thing about visibility hidden is that the element, the space that the element takes up is still there. So it's still there, you just can't see it. This is as opposed to, it looks like I forgot to put this in the slides here. One of the most common ways of removing an element from the page is to set its display none property. If you set to display none, it completely removes it from the page. So as an example of the difference between visibility hidden and display none, I'll try, let's see, I'm going to set this table here. I have a table here, and I'm going to set its visibility to hidden. And it disappears, but the space where it was is still there. The page is rendered as if it was still there, but it doesn't actually render the element itself. If instead I set display none, it's completely removed from the page and everything just sort of moves up to take its place. The page is reflowed and re-rendered. So that's an example of the difference between display none and visibility hidden. Generally speaking, display none is a lot more useful, but visibility hidden is occasionally used as well. Opacity, this is a new CSS3 property. This allows you to specify the translucentness of an element. If it has a background color, for example, you can make it, so this is 0.5, opacity 0.5, that's half transparent, half opaque. It's just a scale between 0.0 and 1.0. Oftentimes very useful. Multi-column layout. So this is an example of having multiple columns together. Okay. Multiple columns together. In this example, all three of these are floated to the right. If these were floated to the left, then the first paragraph would be all the way over to the left. Second paragraph would be just to the right of that. That would be second on the line, and the third paragraph would be the last. Because these are floated right, the first one to get floated right goes all the way to the right. The second one to get floated to the right goes next to that, and the third goes next to that. So this is one way that multi-column layouts are achieved just by floating a couple of different elements together. Another way that you can accomplish multi-column layouts is you can float one element and then maybe set a left margin on that on the main content area. So like if we wanted to modify our course website here a little bit, maybe we want, let's just sort of move one of these things down here and we'll make that into a sidebar. and we'll make the rest of the page move around that. So we'll take this list here and we'll move that down into a sidebar. CSE 154, so this is that. Okay. I'm going to move that down here and make it its own section. I'll make it an aside. Aside is often used for sidebar. And then I'll put that in here. I'll go ahead and get rid of the div class equals column because I'm going to arrange these two things slightly differently. I'm going to have the aside. Actually, what's going to happen now is this is going to move over to the right here. Why is this moved over to the right? Because everything else is floated. This is no longer floated because I took off class equals column. So this is no longer floated, so it's just plain content. It moves up to the right of anything else that's floated to the left. So I'm going to make the aside. I'll just call this ID equals sidebar. I'll say sidebar. I'm going to make that float left. But it's not enough to just make it float left, because if I just make it float left, it'll stay in the same place. It'll stay next to the other things that are also floated left. So what do I want? How do I make it appear beneath everything else? How do I make it go beneath the other stuff that's been floated? Clear. So you can set float and clear on the same element. This element is both floated and it clears anything else above it that's floated left. So let's see what that does. Okay, so this is floated to the left and everything else is clearing it. This, remember, if you remember, we set clear on this before. That is the main content area. We set clear left on that before. We don't want that to happen anymore. We want these two to appear next to each other. Okay. So what we are going to have to do, okay, so this runs into an issue because we removed clear left, but now because these things are floated to the left, it's no longer clearing them. We still want it to clear this area up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce something else to the layout in order to accomplish this. I'm going to wrap all of this in a div. This is a common thing to do, to add elements just for stylistic reasons that don't really have any semantic value. So let's see, section, div. And so what I've done is I've wrapped the sidebar and the main section in a containing element, class of container, dot container, and I'm going to make that clear left. I no longer have to make this clear left because this is inside the container. And then main, why don't I move main down here because I'm going to be modifying that a lot. Sidebar, main. Sidebar and main are now both inside of container, and container I'm making clear left. So container now goes beneath these things that are clear, that are floated left. Okay. The next thing we need to do, we're going to have to restrict the width of this, this left sidebar here. Let's make that width 15 ems. Okay, so now we have this floating to the left and we have this appearing to the left of it. This is, let's see, do we have this floated to the left? We don't have that floated to the left. Okay. I would have expected, I don't know why this isn't happening, but I would have expected the background color to extend all the way across to the left here. That's what I expected, and it's not happening. But that's okay. Overflow hidden. There we go. Okay, so the fact that we said overflow hidden prevented, okay, that's interesting. It prevented the background color from extending all the way to the left. If we want to make sure that this element completely leaves space for this sidebar, one of the things that we can do is we can set a left margin on it. So margin left, we can set to be the exact width of this. So 15 ems. We leave precisely 15 ems of space to the left for that, and then we can turn overflow hidden back on to extend this down to the bottom there. So this is a common way of placing things side by side next to each other. Have one thing floated to the left, have the other thing not floated, but leave a margin next to it. You can also float it to the left if you want. In this case, I'm not. One other thing that we can do is, let's see, if we want to resize this page, you'll notice that this element over here is a fixed width, so it's not being changed. The width of it's not being changed, but the width of this is flexible. The thing on the right is flexible. If I want to, say, add some margins or padding, if I want to add some space in between these two columns, like these are butting right up against each other, how would I accomplish adding a little bit of a gap there? Any ideas? I can use padding. So I could say sidebar padding right 1em. Okay. Technically, what I've done is I still have a left margin of only 15 ems, but the distance between the left side of this and the left side of that is now 16 ems, because margin and padding and border add to the width. So I should actually technically just make this 16, and in fact, that means I don't even need to have that right padding. If I just space it 1em further, then I've added that little gap. And the great thing about this is that this is a fixed width, and this is a flexible width. This automatically takes up 100% of the remaining width. If I had floated this main content to the left, then that wouldn't happen. If I floated it to the left, it would automatically take up as much width as it can, as much width as it needs. I guess in this case, this is kind of a wide container. It's got lots of content, so it might actually take up 100%. But if it had a little bit of content, it would only take up as much space as it needed. This way, it automatically takes up 100% of the width, but I leave space on the left. I think that's all I wanted to talk about today. Emphasize the colors. Okay. I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about, unless there, yeah, question?
Is there a reason there's a sentence after the textbook link? Because it's not on our regular website.
No, it's not. I just added that just for the example. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Actually, really quickly, I should go over your homework assignment. I'll just take a look at that real quick. The homework 2 has been posted. It's a tough one. So this is one you probably want to make use of TAs in the IPL for and make use of the message board. You're going to be designing a movie review page based on a really old design for Rotten Tomatoes. Back when this class was created, this is what Rotten Tomatoes looked like, kind of. And basically, you're going to be implementing something that looks like this. You're going to be using all the layout techniques that we've gone over. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. You're going to be using like floats and putting things into columns and centering stuff and putting like margins and padding on stuff, box model properties, borders, stuff like that. So you're even going to need to use vertical align at some point, I think. So this is it's a difficult assignment. So I'd get started right away and make use of the resources you have available to you. And be sure to read the FAQ, FAQ for the homework that has a couple of common issues that people run into, so be sure to check that out. Okay, I'll let you guys go. See you in lab tomorrow. Oh yeah, question? Oh, lab tomorrow. Gosh, right. Okay. So we don't have lab tomorrow. Forgot about that. So what I'm going to do is, on the course website, I said that I'm going to make this take-home lab. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post this. It's going to be available from today until Sunday, and you will be required to submit it. Okay, so you're going to have to do it at some point on your own between now and Sunday, and then you can submit it, and that will get you your participation points for lab this week. So you will be required to actually complete it through exercise 6. So it's a little bit different lab this week. I wouldn't normally do that, but this is a really important lab to complete because it covers layout and it covers really difficult concepts. So I'll send an email out later on when I post that and make it available. Okay, now you can go.